If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be standing on the edge of losing everything I'd quietly built for my family, I wouldn't have believed you. I've always been the one they counted on. The steady hand behind the scenes, the financial anchor no one thanked but everyone relied on. I'm Audra Chambers, 40 years old, a financial analyst specializing in corporate risk management with over 15 years of experience. To the outside world, I'm just another diligent professional, but at home, I'm something more. I pay the mortgage every month, $1,500 without fail, so my family can keep the house we grew up in. No one asks where the money comes from or even acknowledges it. My younger sister, Lorraine Allen, is the storm beneath our family's calm surface. She's magnetic, gifted at charming everyone, especially Dad, who'd rather avoid conflict than intervene. Lately, subtle things have unsettled me. Misplaced bills, hushed conversations that stop when I enter the room. I push those feelings down, desperate to keep the peace, to believe family comes first. The truth is, the house is legally mine. It's a secret I've held tight, a quiet reassurance in case things ever fell apart. But so far, I've never wanted to use it. I still cling to hope. Growing up, the imbalance in our family was clear, but shaped like an invisible blade, cutting deeper than words. I remember vividly when I was 12, proudly bringing home an A+ on my math test. I ran to show Mom and Dad, expecting praise. But that same week, Lorraine, just 9, got a shiny new bike for her birthday. Suddenly, all attention and warmth shifted to her. "Audra, you're the responsible one," Mom said with a tight smile. "Lorraine needs encouragement." It was the first time I felt like my achievements were invisible, like love was parceled out unevenly. I convinced myself that this was tough love, a way to prepare me for the real world, but it stung. Lorraine was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the perfect daughter expected to be silent and steady. The memory that still haunts me is when Lorraine broke Mom's favorite vase at 16 and blamed me. Dad caught her in the act but said nothing. Instead, he told me to let it go, to avoid family drama. In that moment, I felt betrayed by those who should have protected me. The seed of resentment took root, twisting inside me, growing quietly as the years passed. The sacrifices I've made for this family are countless and often invisible. Over the past 10 years, I've put more than $126,000 toward the mortgage alone. I've covered car repairs when their cars broke down, paid school fees for Lorraine's kids, and shelved my own dreams, turning down a promotion that would have taken me across the country because this family needed me here. I remember missing my own birthday dinner because Lorraine's kids were sick and someone had to stay home. My husband Daniel worries about me. "Audra," he says gently, "they take too much from you, and you get too little back." He's been my rock, reminding me I deserve respect, not just obligation. Still, I've held on to the house deed like a secret weapon, the silent proof of my commitment and the safety net I hope I'll never need to use. Lisa, my older sister, watches these dynamics, yet she hasn't taken sides. Dad remains a passive wall, and Lorraine continues to manipulate with ease, thriving in the chaos she creates. I wonder how long I can keep holding everything together before it all starts to crack. It happened during a family birthday dinner, the kind of evening where smiles and laughter mask the tension simmering underneath. Lorraine, with her usual sly smile, casually said, "Audra always has to control everything, even the money." The room froze for a heartbeat before some nervous chuckles filled the silence. I felt my chest tighten, the sting of humiliation slicing through me. Everyone was looking at me, and I could see the doubt flickering in their eyes. I swallowed hard, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "It's not control," I whispered to the room, voice low but steady. "It's responsibility." Then, without waiting for a response, I excused myself and escaped to the kitchen, the cold tiles grounding me while my mind raced. Later, Daniel tried to soothe me. "Maybe she's just stressed," I said, trying to believe it myself. But inside, a small seed of doubt had taken root. Was this just a slip? Or a crack in the foundation I'd spent years building? For the first time, I held back from engaging further that night, drawing a quiet line. I still wanted peace, still believed in family, but something inside me was shifting, and I couldn't ignore it. Lorraine wasn't one to let a challenge go unanswered. The moment I pulled back, even slightly, she pounced. It started subtly, whispers behind my back, casual insinuations that I was too sensitive or playing the victim. The venom was wrapped in concern, delivered to cousins and aunts during family dinners. Aunt Marlene, whom I once trusted, began dropping hints that maybe I was overreacting, that family was supposed to be messy but forgiving. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the slow suffocation of doubt creeping in. Was I really the problem? Dad, as always, stayed silent, his eyes fixed on his plate or a corner of the room, as if the tension wasn't his burden to bear. His silence was deafening, a tacit permission for Lorraine's whispers to spread. At the next gathering, I noticed a shift. Fewer relatives made eye contact. Conversations died as I approached. The warm smiles I used to see were replaced with polite nods, as if I was a topic best avoided. Lorraine's gaslighting was relentless. When I confronted her once, her voice was honeyed, cold beneath the surface. "Audra, you've always been too serious," she said, brushing off my concerns with a dismissive laugh. "You're imagining things. Maybe you just need to lighten up." The room felt like a cage, my protests echoing off walls that refused to listen. I started questioning myself, wondering if I'd misread everything, if my instincts were faulty. But deep down, I knew this was a calculated wave of manipulation, a tidal force designed to drown me in doubt and isolation. I clung to the hope that a peaceful conversation might pierce the growing fog. I arranged to meet Lorraine and Dad over coffee, hoping to air out the quiet storms swirling beneath the surface. Sitting across from them, with the clatter of cups and murmurs around us, I spoke carefully, my voice steady but strained. I laid out the facts, the mortgage payments I'd been making, the sacrifices I'd quietly shouldered, and the pain her actions caused. Lorraine's eyes shimmered with crocodile tears, her words dripping with manufactured sorrow. "I'm under so much pressure," she whispered, painting herself as the family's wounded soul. Dad nodded, his expression one of tired sympathy, but his words cut deeper than any blade. "Girls, you just need to forgive each other. Family sticks together." I felt the sting of betrayal. The man who should have been a mediator instead became a shield for Lorraine's victim act. I left that table defeated, my hope shattered, realizing that I was trapped in a family system rigged against me. The humiliation found me again, this time in a place I never expected, my professional world. At a work conference dinner, surrounded by colleagues and Daniel, Lorraine cornered me with that familiar smug smile. Her voice was low but loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Audra's been having some financial issues," she said, the words laced with mockery. My heart dropped. I knew exactly what she meant. Without naming specifics, she was dangling the secret of my plummeting credit score, a fact I'd kept hidden to protect my family's fragile stability. Later that night, Daniel and I sat in stunned silence, scrolling through my credit report, hundreds of points wiped away, mortgage refinancing plans in ruins. The embarrassment wasn't just personal, it seeped into my professional reputation. Colleagues who respected me now whispered, and I saw the doubt flicker in their eyes. This wasn't sibling rivalry anymore. Lorraine had crossed a line that felt like a betrayal from the deepest, darkest place. She had weaponized my life, tearing at the foundation I built with my own hands. Despite the wounds, I reached out one last time, desperate for some form of peace. I sent Lorraine a message, clear and unflinching. "I need honesty and respect. Help me fix what you broke." I wasn't asking for apologies or revenge, just fairness. There was a choice before her, to acknowledge the damage and make amends or continue down the path of destruction. Her response was silence at first, then cold denial. She refused to take responsibility, locking me out of communication like a fortress. The final blow came when I uncovered that she had used my identity to purchase a $42,000 truck, a reckless act that crushed my credit deeper. The vulnerability I showed was met with icy indifference. I realized then, with a sinking weight, that forgiveness was no longer an option. I had done everything I could, and she had chosen to burn every bridge between us. leaving me stranded in the wreckage she caused. The whispers started creeping like shadows at dusk, soft at first, but growing louder with every family gathering. I caught fragments, overreacting, too controlling, can't let it go. Even some of my own kin, who knew nothing of the full story, seemed to lean toward Lorraine's subtle narrative. Dad's silence was a quiet endorsement, a wall I couldn't climb or break through. At family dinners, I was the subject of polite avoidance, like a quiet storm no one dared confront. The weight of isolation settled on me, heavy and suffocating. I felt the familiar ache in my chest, the exhaustion that had seeped into my bones after years of holding everything together. Only now, I was crumbling under the strain. Daniel remained my only anchor, reminding me softly, "You're not crazy, Audra. Don't believe their whispers." But his words, though comforting, couldn't drown the doubts swirling inside me. What if I am the problem? The question clawed at my mind relentlessly. I replayed every conversation, every accusation, every sidelong glance. The confusion was a thick fog that blurred the lines between truth and manipulation. My heart ached not with anger, but with a growing, weary sorrow. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made, the hidden pain I carried, and the way the family I'd supported so quietly now seemed to turn its back on me. It was a loneliness that cut deeper than any argument, a silence that screamed louder than any betrayal. Still, beneath the weariness, a subtle shift stirred, a quiet, almost imperceptible change in the way I saw myself and my place in this fractured family. I found myself retreating, not out of defeat, but to gather the fragments of my shattered trust. The house always felt colder now, the walls echoing with memories that no longer comforted, but haunted. The air seemed thicker, the shadows longer. Even the sunlight slipping through the windows couldn't chase away the gnawing sense of abandonment. I wasn't angry yet. Anger felt too sharp, too immediate. Instead, I carried a numbness, a tiredness that wrapped around me like a heavy cloak. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering where it all went wrong and if I'd ever find my way back to the person I used to be. Yet, as despair threatened to consume me, a faint ember flickered deep inside, quiet, steady, waiting. By the time the annual family reunion rolled around, the cold undercurrent within me had settled into a hard, jagged resolve. The gathering was supposed to be a celebration of kinship, but it quickly turned into a stage for Lorraine's grand display. She strutted in with the keys to her new $42,000 truck dangling from her fingers, a trophy flaunted under the collective gaze of the family. The cheers and envy from some relatives felt like daggers twisting in my already wounded heart. But the blow that shattered me wasn't Lorraine's arrogance. It was Dad's weary, dismissive words to me, spoken as casually as if discussing the weather. "Audra, just forgive him. He's family." The pronoun him hung in the air, a cruel twist of fate as if Lorraine were a boy, a reckless child to be excused, not an adult who had destroyed my credit and betrayed my trust. I felt every eye on me, every whispered judgment, and the weight of years of silent sacrifice crashed down all at once. The room spun, the chatter fading into a dull roar in my ears. How could the man who watched everything unfold refuse to stand up for me? His inaction was not just disappointment. It was a final verdict on my worth in this family. In that moment, the last vestiges of hope died. The pain was sharp and cold, but beneath it, a transformation began, subtle, yet irrevocable. I wasn't a broken victim anymore. The veil of denial lifted, replaced by a clarity as chilling as ice. I was no longer a passive player. I was a strategist now, ready to reclaim the power I thought was lost. The fire inside me hardened into something that could not be extinguished by pity or betrayal. That night, alone in the quiet darkness of our bedroom, I let the flood of emotions wash over me. I replayed every sacrifice I'd made, every time I swallowed my pain to keep the peace, every insult masked as concern, every moment Dad turned away. The realization settled over me like a storm. This was no accident, no isolated hurt. It was a pattern, a system that had been in place for years. Lorraine's manipulations, Dad's passivity, the family's blind complicity. They all wove together into a fabric of betrayal that suffocated any hope of fairness. The grief morphed into a cold, burning anger, sharp and focused. I whispered to the empty room, "Never again." For the first time, I saw the house deed, not just as a document, but as a weapon, a source of leverage I had kept hidden for too long. I felt a new version of myself emerging from the ashes of pain, a woman no longer willing to be silent or unseen. The quiet giving, the endless forgiveness, they were over. I was forging a new identity, one tempered by resolve rather than emotion, by strategy rather than sentiment. The tears came, but they washed away the old Audra, the one who hoped and pleaded and waited for change. In their place stood someone ready to act deliberately, to use every advantage she had quietly amassed. The house, the money, the years of hard work, they would become my armor and my sword. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, tasting the bitter sweetness of awakening. The fight would be long and hard, but I was no longer afraid. I was awake. The next morning, I sat down with Daniel, the man who had been my steadfast support through every storm. I told him everything, the hopelessness, the betrayal, the shift in my heart. "I'm done being silent," I said, my voice steady but laced with an unfamiliar steel. "It's time they face the consequences of what they've done." Daniel's eyes held both concern and respect. He nodded slowly, careful, but resolute. "We'll do this together," he said, "but we have to be smart. No rash moves." Together, we began outlining a plan, one grounded in cold logic and quiet power. We agreed to cut all communication with Lorraine and Dad for now, to stop feeding their chaos with my energy. The house deed was our ace, a tangible claim in a game they thought they controlled. We would document everything meticulously, the financial damages, the lies, the betrayals, building a case not just for ourselves, but for the truth that had been buried beneath years of manipulation. Around family, I'd wear a mask of calm, of unaffected composure. They had to see the old Audra, not the woman gathering strength beneath the surface. The silent treatment would be our first weapon, a measured escalation that would unsettle them without giving away our hand. Lorraine and Dad were the targets, but the strategy was broader, quiet, deliberate, and unyielding. For the first time in years, I felt a pulse of control, a cold satisfaction in knowing that this was my fight now, and I was ready to win it on my terms. Daniel reached over, squeezing my hand gently. "We'll get through this," he promised. And for the first time, I believed it. I started by mapping out every weak point in their carefully constructed world. The debts Lorraine had piled up, the countless times I'd covered Dad's expenses without a word, and how tightly the family clung to the house as their emotional anchor. It was a tangled web of dependency, but now I saw the threads clearly. Lorraine's unpaid bills, the mounting credit card balances she never mentioned, even the sneaky charges she made on my accounts when no one was looking. All of it spelled leverage. Dad, with his quiet surrender, relied on me to keep the financial gears turning, never stepping in to lift a finger. The house itself, the one thing we all pretended was stable, was no longer just a shared memory. It was the linchpin holding their lives together. I reached out to a lawyer late one evening, my voice tight with determination as I laid out the situation. "I need to understand exactly what rights I hold," I said, my fingers tapping nervously on the table. The lawyer's calm voice was a balm, yet it sharpened my resolve. She explained how my name on the deed gave me substantial control, how the mortgage payments I'd quietly handled made me the de facto owner in many eyes. When I handed over bank statements showing Lorraine's missed payments and text messages where she admitted to financial strain, I felt the teeth of my plan beginning to take shape. I even found proof of identity theft, the unauthorized truck purchase, and carefully printed everything, each piece a brick in my fortress. Sitting at my desk with the mountain of evidence before me, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. The emotional turmoil slowly gave way to cold strategy. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. It was about survival and justice. I realized they needed me far more than I needed them. My trust had been their currency, and now it was time to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I meticulously documented every transaction, every whispered excuse, every lie hidden behind Lorraine's glossy smile. The power that had been buried under years of sacrifice was now within reach, and for the first time, I allowed myself the bitter satisfaction of that knowledge. At night, I sat alone in the dim light of our kitchen, tracing the flow of money, the paths of deception, like a detective unraveling a case. The house, which once felt like a cage, now gleamed as my strongest weapon. I wasn't just a victim, I was the one holding the keys. I whispered to myself, "This ends now." The emotional weight remained, but it was tempered by a new clarity. I was no longer drowning in the family's dysfunction. I was steering its course. And in that moment, I felt the first true flicker of hope, not for peace, but for control. Behind the carefully maintained mask of calm, I began the silent preparations. I changed passwords on every shared account, severed Lorraine's electronic footholds, and updated legal documents to secure my ownership of the house unequivocally. Each action felt like a quiet strike, invisible but irreversible. At family dinners, I smiled and nodded, keeping the surface smooth as glass. Lorraine and Dad chatted as usual, oblivious to the fact that their lifelines were snapping quietly, one thread at a time. The tension in the room was a silent storm, and only Daniel and I understood the magnitude of what was unfolding beneath the polite chatter. I rehearsed my words in the mirror, picturing how I would assert boundaries when the time came. Calm but firm. That was the tone I needed to strike. I could feel the shift within me, a steady hardening of resolve that steadied my breath and cleared my mind. The house, the debts, the silent sacrifices, they were all pieces of a game I was now determined to win. Yet outwardly, I played the part of the dutiful sister, the patient daughter, keeping the fragile peace like a tightrope walker. The quiet before the storm was suffocating, a breath held long and deep, waiting for release. One evening, as I sifted through old family archives searching for overlooked details, my phone buzzed with a message from Lisa Carter, my older sister, the one I hadn't spoken to much lately. Her words were hesitant, but urgent. "Audra, I've been meaning to tell you something. I never wanted to get involved, but I know about Lorraine's games." My heart raced as she sent a folder filled with documents I hadn't expected. Proof that Dad had secretly diverted nearly $50,000 of inheritance money to cover Lorraine's debts, including that lavish $42,000 truck. Worse yet, this wasn't ignorance on Dad's part. It was tacit enabling, a quiet betrayal hidden beneath his passive facade. I read through the papers in stunned silence, the weight of their implications crashing down on me. Dad's silence was no accident. It was collusion. The money that should have been shared fairly was being funneled into sustaining Lorraine's reckless lifestyle, while I bore the burden in shadows. Lisa confessed she had long suspected this, but feared the fallout of speaking up. Her switch to my side felt like a lifeline thrown across a chasm. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this war. The family's dysfunction was more corrosive than I had imagined, and now I held the proof to expose it all. The revelation ignited a fierce clarity inside me. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was tangible, documented, undeniable. Lisa's quiet support was a beacon, a moral anchor I hadn't realized I needed. As I closed the folder, the pieces of my plan shifted. This was no longer just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about exposing the rotten core beneath years of silence. My grip on the house deed felt stronger, more purposeful. I whispered fiercely, "Now they'll see." With this new ammunition, I steeled myself for the first moves in a long game of reckoning. I began the execution phase quietly, but decisively. The moment had come to cut off the financial support that had kept their fragile world afloat. Without fanfare, I stopped making mortgage payments, letting the silence speak louder than words. I revoked both Dad's and Lorraine's access to every shared account, locking them out of the financial systems they had taken for granted. I reached out to creditors, informing them of the identity theft tied to the truck purchase. The shifts were subtle but seismic. At first, the family couldn't connect the dots. Lorraine's calls went unanswered. Dad's usual requests for help met polite refusals. The calm before had shattered into a deliberate, cold blockade. Daniel watched the transformation with quiet pride. "You're like a different person," he said one evening, his voice tinged with awe. I only nodded. feeling the steely resolve solidify inside me. Each refusal, each locked account, was a small victory, a crack forming in Lorraine's confident facade. I could see it in her eyes during family gatherings, the flicker of uncertainty, the forced smiles that didn't reach her. The first consequences were unfolding, invisible but undeniable. The fortress Lorraine had built on my silence and generosity was beginning to crumble. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was ready to hold them. The room settled into an uneasy quiet as I stood, clutching the stack of documents that had become my shield and sword. The delicate hum of whispered conversations died beneath the weight of my voice, calm but unwavering. "For years I've supported this family silently," I began, my gaze sweeping the faces that had once seen me as invisible. "But Lorraine stole my identity to buy a truck, ruining my credit. Dad enabled this by diverting funds." Hiding behind silence, I watched the color drain from Lorraine's face, the confident mask fracturing into shock. Dad's eyes dropped to the floor, his usual murmurs swallowed by the gravity in the air. Gasps punctuated the room as eyes darted from me to Lorraine and back. I held up the inheritance documents and the proof of identity theft, their weight suddenly tangible to everyone. "This isn't just a family squabble or petty jealousy," I said, steady and unflinching. "This is betrayal, and it's cost me more than just money." My voice echoed softly but firmly as I laid down my terms. No contact until full restitution, no more financial dependency, no more silence. For once, I felt the power shift palpably beneath me, like sinking into a chair that had always been reserved for me, but I never dared to claim. Lorraine's lips trembled, and Dad's silence roared louder than any protest. The family's dynamic, once a fragile balance of denial and enabling, shattered in that moment. The air was thick with disbelief, and a dawning understanding that the story they'd believed was a lie. I wasn't pleading or begging. I wasn't the family's silent martyr anymore. I was the one who held the truth and the evidence. The room hung in a breathless pause, the tension so dense it could be cut with a knife, but I stood unyielding, the quiet storm at the center of a long overdue reckoning. Days after the confrontation, the ripple effects began to flood through our once familiar family fabric. Lorraine's world started crumbling under the weight of calls from creditors demanding payment, her credit frozen as the reality of her actions hit hard. Dad's reputation, once cloaked in passive respect, deteriorated swiftly within the family. Phone calls and messages from both of them poured in. Pleas, apologies, desperate promises. I let the flood wash over me, but replied only through Daniel, setting clear boundaries and conditions that left no room for manipulation. The distance was firm, a border drawn in the sand. Slowly, others began to see the cracks in Lorraine's carefully spun tale. Family members who had once sided with her started asking questions, their doubts growing like embers catching dry brush. The emotional and financial collapse was swift and palpable, sending waves through every dinner conversation and whispered phone call. I felt a quiet satisfaction burn inside, tempered by the knowledge that justice was unfolding on its own terms, without the cruelty I'd feared. The cold satisfaction wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming what was mine, and watching the truth set things right, piece by piece. Even as the chaos swirled around them, I remained a silent sentinel, refusing to be dragged back into the storm. The power wasn't mine to squander on anger or drama anymore. Instead, I let the consequences cascade naturally, knowing that Lorraine and Dad were crumbling beneath the weight of their own choices. The family's undercurrents shifted irreversibly, and I could finally breathe beneath the heavy cloak of betrayal. Watching it dismantle from a distance gave me a new clarity. Sometimes victory is quiet, and sometimes the strongest battles are the ones fought with silence and patience. Lorraine's desperation escalated like a storm breaking over a cliff. Threats of legal action came crashing down, hollow and empty against the mountain of evidence I held. At family gatherings, she played the victim with practiced ease, weaving stories that tried to twist sympathy her way. She rallied relatives to her side, launching waves of guilt trips and distorted narratives aimed at breaking me down. Daniel and I bore the brunt of these flying monkeys, their accusations wild but ultimately powerless. Dad, overwhelmed and fatigued, attempted to mediate, but I remained unyielding, my boundaries forged in steel. Some family members began to see through Lorraine's facade. Aunt Marlene pulled me aside quietly one afternoon, eyes moist with regret. "I'm sorry, Audra," she whispered, voice cracking. I didn't realize how blind I'd been. Her apology was a small balm, but it meant the world. Lorraine's isolation grew visibly, a woman unraveling as her carefully constructed world collapsed. Her threats fizzled against the unassailable facts. Each failed attempt to manipulate only tightened the cage around her desperation. Dad's passivity no longer shielded her. It only exposed their shared vulnerability. My resolve held firm, my boundaries a fortress no guilt or pressure could breach. In the silence that followed, I found a strange kind of peace. The battle had taken its toll, but the victory was real. Lorraine's arc, from confident control to desperate defeat, closed without fanfare, a quiet unraveling witnessed by those willing to see. No grand speeches, no dramatic confrontation beyond the truth laid bare. Just an unshakable truth that stood firm against all attempts to deny it. The family's fragile veneer cracked, forcing a reckoning that had been years overdue. And in that space, I stood taller, unbroken, no longer the victim, but the woman who had reclaimed her life. 6 months later, the house was still mine, free from debt and heavy burdens I once carried silently. Daniel and I had emerged stronger from the storm, our bond forged in the fires of truth and resilience. I had set clear boundaries, firm and unapologetic. No contact with Lorraine or Dad until respect and restitution were more than words. Lorraine faced consequences that would mark her future, though not destroy her entirely, and Dad lived with the weight of his passivity, a silent consequence all his own. I no longer sought validation from those who never deserved it. My peace came from autonomy, from the freedom to define my own life. At the last family gathering, the table was smaller, but the love felt real. Only those willing to respect boundaries and truth showed up. The air was quieter, less charged, but filled with a genuine warmth that had been absent for too long. I felt an unfamiliar lightness, a shedding of old burdens that no longer defined me. The house, once a symbol of conflict, became a refuge, a place where I could finally breathe. Reflecting on the journey, I understood that peace wasn't about fixing everyone or forcing forgiveness. It was about claiming my own space, my own strength, and letting go of what I could never control. As I closed the door behind the last guest, the silence was comforting rather than suffocating. I looked around the rooms filled with memories, some painful, others cherished, and felt a quiet gratitude. For the first time, I wasn't fighting to be seen or heard. I simply was, and that was enough. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape, free of the shadows that once held me captive. I smiled softly, breathing in the calm. This was my life now, and I was ready to live it on my terms.